So the plan for today is to look at the Buddhist stuff in a bit more detail, especially the problems with the Buddhist theory. I've been trying to defend it no end, but I think, one sort of, to be fair, one should get a good sense of, what the problems are with the Buddhist theory. So I thought hopefully we'll have a shortish lecture and finish an hour, a little over an hour today, and not go the whole 2 hours. But let's see how we go. I mean, if there's lots of discussion, we might go a little slower than that, and then we'll have the break. But I thought perhaps it might be better for you all if we... so the reason why I thought it's important to spend another week thinking about the Buddhist theory is I thought at the end of the course, I do not want you to go away with the thought that there are no problems with the Buddhist theory, because of the kind of work I do myself and the kind of, convictions I have formed over the years. Doesn't mean that I'm right and there are not other views around, there are not other people that have problems. So, you should have an open mind as to what is really going on in Buddhism. So I want to sort of pose this as, one of the important things in the Buddhist theory is their notion of causal relations. They put a lot of weight on causal relations. All explanations are given in terms of causal relations. Think about memory, think about ownership of experiences, why is it that I own my experiences? All of those, all of the things that the Buddhist needs to explain, wants to explain, I think the Buddhist uses the notion of causal relations. But, there is two questions. How much can they explain in terms of causal relations, and what is left without an explanation? For the Buddhist, whatever is left without an explanation, they say that's not real. That's where they wheel in the doctrine of two truths that we talked about last time, conventional truth as opposed to ultimate truth. So anything that they fail to explain, they say it's just a convention. There is no deeper explanation to be offered. And things that they do want to explain and end up explaining, a lot of weight is put on the notion of causal relations. So you have to see their strategy. Things that they cannot explain, they have this other device. So there are two devices they're using. One is the doctrine of two truths, and two is the doctrine of causal relations. And what we are going to do today is first look at some of their explanations in terms of the doctrine of two truths, whether that is satisfactory or not, and then ask, have a close look at the notion of causal relation or the notion of causation that the Buddhist is working with. So, someone might say to the Buddhist, what explains the uniqueness of persons? The way the Buddhist picture is explained, it doesn't seem that, Monima and Kim and Lucas are distinct individuals. That's not the case. We're not different from each other. Remember, the Buddhist said, you're neither the same nor different. But the way in which we use language, the way in which we carry ourselves, out in everyday practical world, suggests that, we think of ourselves as distinct individuals. What do you think the Buddhist is going to say to that? How do we explain the uniqueness? Do you think the Buddhist will make an attempt to explain uniqueness?
It's just a different set of previous conditions and experiences that all change one thing slightly.
Yeah.
The accent I have is not because I choose to have it. It's because it's a process that has come about through the people I've grown up with, and so it's there is this difference, but it's
explained by causal relations. Any responses to that? So here's a suggestion. We can explain uniqueness. We just need to think, hard about the kinds of causal relations that are involved in each of the cases, and we can come up with a unique way of describing every person, the unique accent, their ways, why they behave in a certain way, and so on and so forth. We can actually say, carve out unique individuals. Yeah? Yes, they do make that point. In the text when we looked at last week, they have this idea when they talk about the analogies, what makes you the same person over time, the milk changing into sour cream, changing into butter, and so on. And then they have this phrase that it is through the link with the embryonic body. So, you might think that, there is a way, or there is at least hope of explaining causal relations in terms of, there is hope of explaining uniqueness of persons in terms of causal relations, but in fact, the Buddhist does not take that route. The Buddhists say that talking about persons as unique entities, talking about me and you being different and unique in some way, is just an interest-relative activity. That's not the way the world is. That's not how the world is. It's because it makes our practical life easier. It is better, yes. It's only a convention that, we refer to this person as that, Nagasena, Surasena, and so on and so on. The Buddhist does not explain it. So it's not as if they have or they attempt to give an explanation. One might offer one. I'm not denying that. One might offer one. But the Buddhist strategy is not to try and explain uniqueness of persons. Rather, they rubbish it as, or, at least treat it lightly as just a result of interest-relative activity. We could play a game if we had this interest in playing games, and we could give each of these chairs names, even though they're exactly similar in qualities. If we gave them a name and we played this game, they would not become unique. That's what the Buddhist is saying. Just because we have different names for individuals, just because they're not unique, there's no way that we should not try and think of persons as unique entities. So they just think it's just pragmatically useful device to use names and refer to persons uniquely. There's no truth of the matter there. It's an interest-relative activity only to be explained away, if you like, at the conventional level. The other idea about, continuity of persons, and I briefly touched on it last time, what does the Buddhist have to say about continuity over time? Again, the Buddhist says that there is no continuity over time. There is just an appearance of continuity. That's the main difference with Parfit. Parfit actually tries to explain continuity in terms of he calls it psychological continuity in terms of causal relations. The Buddhist says, no, there are causal relations and they give a semblance. It appears as if there is continuity. Again, at the ultimate level, for the Buddhist, there is no continuity. I call it ersatz continuity, which means not quite real. How coffee snobs in Melbourne call instant coffee ersatz coffee. It's not quite real. So if you want to be fashionable and go out, and talk about your philosophical education, you can use this word ersatz, which is not real. It just is something that is used as, it appears to be coffee, but it's not really coffee. It's ersatz coffee. Or electronic cigarettes are ersatz cigarettes. That's, it's not quite. There's further problems and further, sort of need for explanations. If, as the Buddhist says, that there is nothing that the term I refers to, There is just a bundle of physical and mental states. Remember, I is just used like a fist, this particular combination of fingers and thumb in a certain way. There's no fist over and above the fingers and the thumb. So the Buddhists say exactly in the same way there's mental and physical elements. Luckily, there are 5 as well. Mental and physical elements put together by causal relations, and there is nothing that the term I refers to. But then people would say, well, what about true statements? Or what about, my, not even, sort of talking about it in language, not making it just a linguistic issue, but just thinking about, I feel I have self-consciousness. I'm aware of some states. I'm standing right now. I'm aware that I'm standing right now. You're listening to me. You're aware that you're listening to me. Right? We're conscious of some of our states. And the concern for the Buddhist is, well, how do we explain self-consciousness without a self? What does it mean to be conscious of my own states? What does it mean? And this, issue about being conscious of one's own states sort of raises this further issue that one is not just conscious of one thing. One is sometimes conscious of more than one thing. If you have a very important, appointment at 12 o'clock that you would not like to be late for, even if you come to class and, you engage in what's going on in the class, at the same time, you keep an eye on the time, so you're aware of 2 things. You might even, at the same time, be aware of, all the work that you have to do this week. So a person is not just aware of, one thing at a time. A person is aware of many things at a time. So there's 2 notions of unity in self-consciousness. There is, the sorts of things we are aware of, and there's a lot of them at any given time. And then that's called sometimes synchronic unity, unity at a time. And then there is the question of unity over time, right? We are aware of different things, but there is still the sense that I, the same thing, that's what the Hindu notion of the knowing agent or the conscious agent over a period of time. I am conscious that I was the one who saw this yesterday. I am conscious now, or I remember consciously that I was aware. I was here last week. I made the point about, trying to defend the Buddhist view. I was trying to defend it. I remember that distinctly. I'm aware of that right now. So there is self-consciousness and, this notion of self-consciousness, not just, what the referent of the I is. This notion of self-consciousness demands an explanation of 2 kinds of unity. Synchronic unity, unity of experiences at a time, and diachronic unity, unity of experiences over time. And the Buddhist has to say something about each of these. Well, it has to give some explanation of the phenomena. What do you think the Buddhist might say about unity at a time? So I am aware of, let's say, at least 3 things right now. I'm aware of standing, I'm aware of holding this in my hand, not letting it drop, and I'm aware that I am giving a lecture, or at least talking to students. I'm aware of these 3 things. These are all in my consciousness. They're unified in some sense. They don't appear to me as distinct states. They appear to me as, there's no my, the Buddhist says, but they appear to me as states had by this one thing, or somehow being together. What might the Buddhist say about unity at a time? Do you think the Buddhist will try and explain it in terms of causal relations? And can the Buddhist explain it? The Buddhist does try to explain it. Synchronic unity. The Buddhist does try to explain synchronic unity and says causal relations. And in fact, it's even though it's not a part of the course or the text that you're looking at, they have this idea that, there is the sense organs, if you like, have a common substratum, because the sense organs, your conscious experiences are not just formed by taking in bits of information. You are seeing something, you are touching something, you're thinking about something. That's not how your experiences, that's not the only source of forming experiences. Your experiences are formed, according to the Buddhist, by, sort of a contribution, if you like, from the inside as well. You see a chair because you have previous knowledge this is a chair. All you see is some form and, color and so on and so forth. Why do you see it as a chair? Because you already have a concept of a chair. So it's like thinking of a conscious experience is not formed by just having sensory input. A conscious experience requires much more than a sensory input. Conscious experience requires having an input, if you like, from the mind, input from the mental states, so to say, that you already have. The Buddhists call them sanskaras, or things that you have already, come across. They're your sanskaras. So this, is a common base. So what unifies our experiences at a time, is that even though the information is coming from different senses, and we might think there are distinct mental states, all these distinct conscious experiences have part of a common source, are partly, intertwined. So this idea, this notion is called sometimes the eighth consciousness. They have these ideas about different kinds of consciousness. This is sometimes, if you read more Buddhist philosophy, this is the special thing called eighth consciousness, not the six, the five sensory ones and the internal consciousness. There is a seventh and an eighth according to them, and this thing is called. So the Buddhists try and give an account of synchronic unity of experiences, but when it comes to diachronic unity, experiences over time, they just say you're making it up. That's just conventional. There is no unity over time. So they will just say, we need nothing more than causal relations. So here's what they say, for example, for memory. If you, push the Buddhists that memory requires experience over time, and so, some kind of unity with the past is required, and causal relations cannot account for this unity. And the Buddhists say, really, when you think about memory, think about memory, what you remember. What you remember is kind of colored by what your interests are. You recall facts. Think about this thing. You recall facts. What you recall at a certain moment is sort of guided by why you need that information now, right? You're not recalling all sorts of things at any time. The Buddhist account, in psychology, and if some of you are doing psychology, this is very, very popular. They don't think of memory as, a true representation of the past. They think of memory as a reconstruction in the present, and you reconstruct it according to your interests. Memory is not showing you as the past really is. So that's called, the psychologists and the Buddhists question that memory is just representing the past, or, representing the past to you. What memory is doing, it's actually constructing or reconstructing the past. And the way memory reconstructs the past is thinking about your current needs. That's the facts you recall, because your current needs. And the Buddhists say, it might not even be a true representation of what the past is. You make it up. There are things that are important to you, so you remember those bits in the past, not every bit. I might, think of an important experience in my past. I might remember when I got my PhD, let's say. I might remember, what it was to hold that degree and my name being called out and the little summary being read out. But if you ask me, what color shoes I was wearing, we all get dressed up, I couldn't remember. It was so long in the past. That's just not a detail that was important to me. Perhaps if I still have my graduation dress hanging around, which I can't possibly fit into right now, I might still have a memory of that. But I certainly could not remember where I went to dinner. Of course, I had too much to drink, so I can't remember where I went to dinner. Right? So the things that I remember are things that matter, and that's why the Buddhists say memory is just a reconstruction of the past in the present. Memory is not a true copy of the past. Memory is not representing the past that is there in some sense. We don't need diachronic unity to explain. In sort of emphasizing this point about self-consciousness and synchronic and diachronic unity, I exactly want to bring to your notice, on the one hand, they're using the device of causal relations to explain synchronic unity. On the other hand, things that they don't want to be admitted as real, they are sort of calling them, oh, that's just conventional truth. We take it because we think, it suits our purposes, so to say. And the Buddhists say it actually doesn't suit your purposes if the purpose is to reduce suffering, or if the purpose is to be more happy. Thinking about oneself as a continuing entity with a past and a future actually produces more suffering than pain, than happiness. And so the Buddhists say you might think it serves your purpose, you might think it is a good convention to have, but in fact it's a bad convention and one that we should give up. Another point about, this is kind of a consequence of the no-self theory. One of the consequences of the no-self theory, and it's pointed out in the Reader, in the article by Matilal, a very solid Indian philosopher, and quite a nice article if you want to read it. It's in the study guide. And Matilal points out that one of the implications of the no-self theory is not only the unity of self is lost, not only the self is not a unified thing, there are no persons, but there are no objects either. Because objects are also reduced to bundles of sensations. So, according to the Buddhists, what you get in terms of, sensing this chair, what you get is an impression of the color, an impression of the shape. These are distinct states, right? Impression of shape, impression of color. If I touch it, through touch, impression of hardness, so on and so forth. But, there's nothing like being able to put it together because there is no agent there. So not only, the way Matilal puts it, not only the unity of self is shattered, is given up, but also objects are shattered into different things, different states. So neither there are any persons, nor there are any objects. And the Buddhist strategy that, there are no persons is meant to be a very strong one. Strong in the sense, you might think that if there are no objects, if objects are shattered into sets of states, color, form, and so on and so forth, if objects, why would I desire those things? I don't desire the Gucci bag in the Chadstone shopping center because of its color, because of its label, because of its material. It's those things put together. That makes it the object of desire. That's, what is desirable. It's not just one particular thing or, a collection of these things, because these collection of things could have been put together very badly and then I wouldn't desire it at all, right? it could just be a fake Gucci, for example. I guess Gucci wouldn't put it together badly, but a fake one could put all the same things and make it look really ugly, and then it wouldn't be an object of desire. But the stronger point that Matilal makes is that, getting rid of the self, getting rid of the subject of desire is a much stronger move on behalf of the Buddhist, because it's not giving up desire by giving up objects of desire. By giving up the subject, there is no logical possibility of desire. If there is no subject, if there is no continuing being, the logical possibility, and that's a very strong claim, it's not even possible now to have a desire, because desire requires there to be a subject of desire. If there is no subject, if there is no continuing subject, the point of desire goes away. We can't even make sense of desiring for whom. A desire is had by someone. If there is no someone, then the desire doesn't make sense. So it's a very strong claim. He thinks, you might think that the Buddhist, does away with desires because in the Buddhist world, we can't think of continuing objects. But that's not the case. That's not the only case. Sure, we can't think of continuing objects, but that still does not take away the desire, because there is still a subject that is doing the desire. So the Buddhist strategy is to take away the logical possibility of desire. Desire is the root cause of suffering, and so hit at the root cause of suffering, take away the possibility of desire. If there is no continuing being, there is no possibility of desire at all. So it's not just no objects, it's no subjects, which really does the work for the Buddhist universe, in the Buddhist universe, of reducing suffering. Now I want to talk about causal relations. Any questions so far? It's kind of trying to point to various phenomena and what kind of explanation that the Buddhists can give of these phenomena, and you can see the two-pronged strategy, as I call it. On the one hand, the Buddhist tries to use causal relations to explain certain things. On the other hand, things that they cannot explain or they would not like to explain, they just dismiss them and put them in the basket of conventional truth. Now let's just think a lot of weight in the Buddhist universe, and I hope everyone agrees and everyone can see the point, is on the notion of causal relations. And you might think causal relations, we all know what causal relations are. But, is the Buddhist notion of causal relation, can we really make sense of the Buddhist notion of causal relations? What might the Buddhist mean by causal relation? That's what I want to bring your attention to. Remember one point about the Buddhist account of continuity over time and continuity across lifetimes. The Buddhist says it's exactly the same thing happening. So mental and physical states cause the next thing, cause the next thing, cause the next thing within a lifetime, and this also happens across lifetimes, right? Mental and physical states cause the next lifetime. Let me read you a little passage just to remind you about what they have to say about rebirth, and tell me if you think that their account is similar to the account, of continuity within a lifetime. It is only elements, this is on page 128, section 47C. It is only elements of being possessing a dependence that arrive at a new existence, none transmigrated from the last existence, nor are they in the new existence without causes contained in the old. By this is said that it is only elements of being, with form or without, but possessing a dependence, that arrive at a new existence. There is no entity, no living principle, no elements of being transmigrated from the last existence into the present one, nor, on the other hand, do they appear in the present existence without causes in the in that one. This we will now make plain by considering birth and death as they occur every day among men. So that's their account of over lifetimes. Let me just read to you, just to remind you about their account within a lifetime, and see how similar that is. So that's on page, the no continuous personal identity section, page 123. So in exactly the same way, Your Majesty, do the elements of being join one another in serial succession. One element perishes, another arises, succeeding each other as it were instantaneously. So elements of being join, and that's exactly what happens across lifetimes. So take it as a given that the Buddhists say that whatever it is that whatever it is that gives us the appearance of continuity within a lifetime, the same thing is enough to give an appearance of continuity across lifetimes. We might think, the way in which I suffer for my bad deeds in the past and karma works is because my present states are causally dependent on the past one. The way this happens across lifetimes is also because my present states are causally dependent on the last one. But if you notice on the quote, there is one difference that the Buddhist points out. So the account is the same, but it says, it is only elements of being possessing a dependence that arrive at a new existence, none from the last existence, none transmigrated, nor are they in the new existence without causes. By this is said that it is only elements of being with form or without. When they say with form or without, what they're pointing to is material elements don't necessarily, are not necessarily causing something in the next life. So what the Buddhists are saying is when we talk about transmigration, or when we talk about rebirth without transmigration, we should not think that one physical state is affecting another is giving rise to another physical state. Continuity of form, continuity of matter is not essential. Continuity of mental stuff is what is essential. Continuity of matter is not essential. Now you might think, that's really not all that bad. After all, we've all heard about teleportation. Have people heard about teleportation in various, sci-fi things, that all the information is copied here from a person, and then the information is sent to another planet in a matter of minutes, and there from matter the same, being is kind of reconstructed. So, or, the other sort of thought experiments that philosophers talk about when they're talking about, imagine that, my body, I was in a very bad accident and the body is, disintegrated or whatever, but my brain is intact. When I'm taken to hospital in an ambulance, they realize the brain is completely functioning, but the body is gone. In the hospital, they have this other person who's brain dead. The organs are fine. The ventilator is working. They're brain dead, but the organs are fine. They've had a brain tumor or an, hematoma or something has happened in the brain, and because of massive bleeding, the brain cannot be recovered, but the body is completely fine. Now, what do the doctors think? Right? We've got a brain here, which is completely fine. We've got a body here. We cannot save two individuals. Let us save one. So they put my brain in that other body. Now, if I were to ask you which individual survives, what would you say? Does Monima survive? Or let's call her Carla. Does Carla survive? And these doctors, they're very concerned that when I wake up, I shouldn't say I, when this body and brain complex wakes up and looks at themselves in the mirror, they're going to be very confused because my memories will be of monomer and this person is going to look very different. So what do? They get a photo of me and they get some plastic surgeons working on me and reconstruct the body, shape the body so that it looks very much like me. A little bit they'll tell me, it's not quite the same because you were in a bad accident and we had to do a little bit of reconstruction. So now there's a person who looks like me, the body is like me. It's my brain. All the fibers joined together to that. Which person survives? Is that monomer or Carla? What would you think? Not the same matter, but the same mental stuff. Does anyone think neither survives? That's neither monomer nor Carla. Yeah?
Not completely.
Well, survival is to an extent. When I'm 90, I will have lost lots of, my body functioning and so, but it'll still be, I'll survive to 90. I probably won't be able to walk and, lots of things would have changed. So in some sense, you think?
Well, I think certainly from a Western perspective, if you are thinking of a person, you are thinking of the brain, because I know, when doctors are talking about somebody who is brain dead, sometimes they won't refer to them as actually being there at all.
Yeah.
They're gone, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. So you think, in a sense it would be monomer, because she's the brain in there. And when she wakes up...
I think that's the most obvious
answer.
answer.
So that's the monomer answer. Any other answer? Or do everyone agree that that's the most intuitive answer to give?
Because, the brain can sort of see itself a little bit and can definitely see the body, but the body can't see either.
Yeah? So, and the body can be reconstructed to look like. So it's very much like a different form taking over that mental state. Think in the Buddhist way, it's a different form taking over that mental state. That's what happens. The Buddhist will say, you can make sense of rebirth. It's just the different form taking over, the karma, taking over the mental states of the previous person. And so the Buddhist goes with the intuitive answer on this, which is, I survive, monomer survives, Kala is dead and gone in that new body. So you might think that's okay, continuity of form is not essential for being the same person. But with continuity of form, notice what goes. When we talk within a lifetime, there is spatial continuity. I don't, when I say there is me going out of existence and coming back into existence and going out of existence, not the whole of me, but states of me are going, I don't pop up in different places. I'm not here one moment and there one moment. There is spatial continuity. There is temporal contiguity. At least that is there when we are talking about a person within a lifetime. There is spatial and temporal contiguity, but not across lifetimes, because, as in the case, it might have taken the doctors months to reconstruct, to keep me under coma, induced coma, and do all those operations on me so it looked like me, so I didn't have a shock, or something like that. So there's no temporal continuity. There is no spatial continuity. My body, the form was kind of dead somewhere else. But you might think, okay, that's all right. No spatial, no temporal continuity, but we can still make sense of being the same person. We can still make sense of being, because it's form which is essential. Fine, so that's one part of it. Let's now, it's the name, it's the mental states which is essential, so let's now think of the mental states. What's a reason to think that, in the example that I was giving, what's the reason to think it's still me? Because my memories are there. Okay, now think of another accident. Sorry, I am a very accident-prone person. This time, something goes through my head, and the part of the head that, it's only science fiction, we're just making up examples, don't go this. A rod goes through my head in a construction site. I like looking at construction sites. I often go up to the 6th floor where my office is, and before I go into the office, I stand there and stare at what's happening downstairs by the lifts. It's quite interesting. Anyway, so I'm at a construction site, lost in admiring, the skills the people have, and a rod goes through my head. And it damages the part which has, which stores memory, so the hippocampus, or whatever is completely damaged. So off I go again to the hospital, wake up, no memory at all. What's my name? Don't know. What do you do? Don't know. Where do you live? Can't say. No memories at all. But, when they do find out, because they found out, as the police do, and they find out who I was, etc., and, my family comes along and reclaims me, they recognize it's me. There's continuity of form. Only this part of the brain has been damaged. They also say, the personality is the same. I behave in the same nice, kind way that I usually am. So there's no continuity of memory, but you think, well, it's still her, right? It makes sense to say it's still Monima. We know she's lost her memories, and she can't remember any of those things. And this is exactly the reason why you visit a very old relative in the nursing home who has no memory. A friend of mine told me he came all the way from America to visit his grandmother. Friends of mine are kind of 40 to 60, so imagine that age. Don't think of friends of yours. So friends of mine comes all the way from America to visit his mother in a nursing home, and the mother doesn't even recognize him. Doesn't even recognize who's visiting, right? Because she's demented, Alzheimer's has taken over. She has a little bit of conversation with him, and then says, by the way, who are you? And so, my friend is shocked. Why do we do it? Because we still think that's my mum. Why did he come all the way to visit her? That's my mother. Even though she has no memory, we still think it's the same person. Exactly like the case. Even there is no memory, we still think it's the same person. Why do we think that? Why do we still think that it's the same person? What's the reason? Yeah?
Maybe because of your connection to that person and your memories of that person and the way they work.
Yep, your connection to that person, your memories, so, in some sense, you're kind of imposing an identity on them. You still think that they are the same person because you were imposing an identity on them, reconstructed out of your own. But, the main point here is, even without memory, we do seem to think there are ways of thinking it's the same person. And so, across lifetimes, in the Buddhist case, there's no memory. There's no continuity of memory across lifetimes. That's all right. How does it matter? No spatial temporal continuity, no memory. Think about the last thing. Suppose someone has become let's suppose me. I've become a drug addict. I take lots of these drugs. And now this time, over a period of time, using these drugs leads to a huge personality change. My memories are fine. I remember what I do. I remember where I live. I come to Monash. I do all of those things. But I am a changed person in some sense. I behave very differently. My personality, my character traits. I'm very angry, I'm very bitter, you know, a completely different person from the person I was. Across lifetimes, that's going to happen. Completely different personality. Depends on what kinds of actions you did in a previous life. The Buddhist doesn't say, you know, you'll have continue with the same personality across lifetime. Again, you might think, does that matter? No, we just say that's the same person, you know. It's the same person in some sense. Would you still say it's me? Even though I behaved, you know, very differently, it's not kind. I think I'm kind right now, but I'm not kind anymore. Angry, bitter, spiteful, you know, all those nasty traits that you can think of. I exemplify all of those because of that. Now you might think, well, that's exactly the Buddhist account. We went through it one by one. We talked about continuity of body. That doesn't matter. We talked about continuity of memory. That doesn't matter. We talked about continuity of personality. That doesn't matter. Okay? And so the Buddhist account should be fine across lifetimes. There's no continuity of form. There is no continuity of memory. There is no continuity of personality. But we still think it's the same person. There's a trick here, and the trick is this. You know, when I asked in the case of, you know, say the grandmother that, you know, you go and visit in the nursing home who has no memory, the reason why, one of the reasons why, you gave me a reason why you might think it's the same person, you're imposing identity on it, but there is continuity of body in that case. You know, even though it's not the same body that you knew from 40 years ago, there's continuity of body, there's spatio-temporal continuity, right? There's probably continuity of personality, or at least one of these three is here. When I talked about memories, my memory is gone because of that bad accident. Again, there is continuity of body, and there is continuity of personality. That's what makes you think it's the same person, right? So what, you know, when you really think about the Buddhist account across lifetimes, there is none of the features that might lead you to think it's the same person, except the one thing that we impose identity. We reconstruct that being the same person. And there is nothing at all. And that should, you know, should make you worry about the notion of causation at play. Let me explain why. When we think of continuity, when the Buddhist says causal relations explain, you know, memory within a lifetime, causal relations explain continuity of personality without a lifetime, there is some evidence for why there is a causal relation here. You know, you see continuity of memories, you see continuity of personalities, you see spatio-temporal continuity. Now the Buddhist is saying all of these things that we take as evidence of causation might be absent, but there is still causation. Anything that you might think of as evidence of causation is absent in the case of rebirth, but the Buddhist still insists there is causation. Why should you believe them? Yeah.
What about karma?
Karma is not absent, but what I want to, that's a good point, karma is not absent. But do you worry about the Hindu account in terms of soul being carried from one lifetime to another? We worry about that because we think, you know, what evidence is there for believing that there is a soul, right? We think there is no evidence from a Western perspective, from science tells us, you know, there is nothing like a soul. There was that famous article, you know, your soul just died when the big heyday in the 90s, when we were studying philosophy of mind. There was this famous article by, when they were talking about materialism and, you know, neuroscience being able to explain everything, and that's the real truth. There was this article in the New York Times, I think, sorry, your soul just died. Quite famous. Type it. It's an interesting read as to, you know, what what people thought in the 90s about where science had become, and materialism was the ultimate truth. So the reason we are suspicious about the Hindu account is because we think there is no evidence for the soul. Right? What I'm saying is we should, for the same reason, be suspicious of the Buddhist account, because when it comes to rebirth, there is no evidence for causal relations. Just because the label that they use for carrying karma across lifetimes, instead of using the soul label, these Buddhists are using a physicalistically respectable label. They call it causation, but that's not causation as we understand it, because there is no evidence for it. You know, so their notion of causal relations at bottom is very, very suspicious, because they pick up a concept that everyone uses and then extend it to use it for talking across lifetimes, and all the while we thought, yes, causal relations, they make sense within a lifetime, they make sense. But I think they're smuggling something here. They're just giving, you know, whatever it is that carries karma, a label that we are familiar with, rather than a label that we are unfamiliar with. Their account is just as bad as the Hindus. If the worry is, you know, that the Hindu account smuggles in this soul business, you should equally worry that the Buddhist account smuggles in this cause business, and it's not cause in the way I understand cause, because in the way I understand cause, where I think there is causation, there is some evidence of causation. You know, why do I think that, you know, I guess what is causing, why do we think that, you know, global warming is causing the temperatures to rise, or the water levels in the ocean rising? Why do we think it's causing? Because there is evidence. You know, causal relations, anywhere where we posit a causal relation, is based on a lot of evidence. In the case of personal identity, where causal relations play a role, in the case of, you know, identity of persons over time, or continuity of persons over time, causal relations play a role because there is evidence. There's continuity of personality, there's spatio-temporal continuity, there is you know, continuity of memory. These things are evidential. But the Buddhist notion of cause, the Buddhist takes an ordinary notion and extends it. This is an important, I think this is an important philosophical, you know, sort of strategy to worry about. That philosophers often do that. They use a label that will make sense so that, you know, their account looks. But you should always worry about when an ordinary common sense notion is being used to justify a theory which is difficult to believe. You should always think of, you know, pay attention to how they use these terms that we all think we understand. The Buddhist is using this notion of causation. I've been running with it. Everyone's been nodding for all these weeks. We've never had trouble, right? But when we stop and think about, you know, what is the evidence for cause, for believing that there is causation, there is none. So the Buddhist notion of causation, whatever it is not the notion of causation that the scientists use, is not the notion of causation that, you know, me and you use when we commonly think about the notion of causation in ordinary discourse. Any questions about that? So, yeah.
The causal relations argument sounds a bit like determinism, where it will just keep justifying itself, and every time you bring up something that doesn't fit, they say, well, it's because that is because of determinism as because of causal relations. It sounds a bit like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're quite right to raise that worry. So that worry is a different kind of worry. You know, if causal relations are everywhere, used to explain everything, then again it sounds a bit suspicious. When we talked about the Hindu doctrine of karma, karma explains everything for the Hindus. Why do I sneeze? Because of my karma. Why do I have a bad day? Because of my karma. Karma explains everything. And think about the Christian conception. Some devout Christians think, it's God's will. Mom, why did this happen to me? It's God's will. Everything is explained in terms of God's will. That kind of explanation, again, you should always be suspicious of, because, if the one thing is wheeled in to explain everything, the explanation is too general. The explanation is way too general. That's why the God's will kind of explanation is unsatisfactory. That's why the Buddhist causal relation, and it's the same kind of point. The Buddhist uses causal relation, but the Buddhist uses causal relation to explain everything. That should make us suspicious about what notion of causation is at play. Karma explains everything. Why is it raining outside, and why did I forget my umbrella? Karma. You were meant to suffer. No, thank you. Some accidents happen. So that's exactly the kind of, sort of same kind of worry here, made from a different perspective, that, the fact that causal relations are used to explain everything and anything should make us suspicious of causal. Should have made us suspicious all these weeks ago. But we played along with them, and we thought everything was fine. They were just talking about causal relations. And we all understand this notion. Not quite. When we think that, their notion of causal relation can explain rebirth, we really have to, worry about what their notion of causation is that is at play here. And once you raise that kind of concern, the whole Buddhist edifice is shaking, according to me, I think. It's not all that hunky-dory. I know it is 11:06. Can we continue for another 10 minutes, and then we'll finish the lecture early? Because I think I have only one more point to make about how to understand the no-self theory. So is everyone clear about the point about causation? It's kind of a difficult one to grasp, but I think it's an important one, and it's an important strategy to keep in mind. Explanations that work for everything should always be treated with suspicion. When philosophers use, so these are two philosophical strategies to keep in mind when you're doing other philosophy courses, when philosophers use a common sense notion to justify something that sounds outrageous to you, think about how they're using their common sense notion. There must be something suspicious, and you need to dig deeper. You need to stop and stare at it for long enough to see what's going on here. Important philosophical strategies, I think. Okay, so now a point about how should we understand the no-self theory. As I've said, and the Buddhists say it all over the place, in all the scriptures, in all the the texts in the tradition. So the philosophers following the Buddha, the scriptures are, the sutras in this case, or the scriptures are the Buddha's own words, the dialogues. But there are other texts, and quite the dialogues, as you've seen, you've come across some of them, they're difficult to understand. They've got lots and lots of examples. You might think they're easy to understand, but they don't really give you arguments. Later on in Buddhist philosophy, from about the 3rd century BC to about the 8th century, 10th century AD, you get a lot of precise formulation of doctrines, you get a lot of precise arguments, and so on and so forth. And there in the text, these are, people who've lived their lives as Buddhists and, who believe this theory, who are trying to explain this theory and defend this theory. They often make the claim that, the reason why we suffer is because we are mistaken about reality. So the root cause of suffering is that we are mistaken about reality. What, and this is, we've talked about this before, this is kind of linked up with mindfulness meditation. What meditation gives you, what meditation allows you to do is to see things as they really are. So this notion, seeing things as they really are, plays a very important role in the Buddhist scripture. And that suggests, when they talk about seeing things as they really are, that suggests that what the Buddhist is after is proper metaphysics, looking for the way the world is. But, so mindfulness meditation, you see the way the world is, you see impermanence. You see that things are really impermanent. You concentrate on your mind and you just think about the number of thoughts that pass through your mind. Just do this little meditation exercise. Forget about being in the right posture or relaxing or anything. Just concentrate for the next couple of minutes on what is going through your mind. And do it. Think about what's going through your mind for the next couple of minutes. I think that will do. Anyone had just one thought? Or did many thoughts come and go? Many thoughts? Many thoughts? And that's exactly the Buddhist point, You see impermanence. You can't hold on to one thought. Even when you're trying to hold on to one thought, other thoughts will come and interfere. And so and the Buddhist thinks that the reason why we take things to be continuing is because we are all the time distracted. We are not paying attention. Pay attention, and what you see is that things are fleeting by. You're always changing, thinking of different things, different mental states come and go, can't hold on to anything. And, of course, the Buddhist says that a person lasts as long as a thought lasts. So many different yous have come and gone in the 1 or so minute I gave you to just concentrate on what's going through your mind, or just to attend to what's going through your mind. So, in a sense, the Buddhist claims that what they're doing is real metaphysics. They're telling you about the nature of the world, and they depend on, meditative experience as a way of attending to. It's because of lack of attention we are ignorant about the nature of reality. We often get things wrong when we don't attend. If we are not attending to our driving, we will drive badly. Or we're not attending to what we are writing, we will, misspell and not use proper punctuation and so on and so forth if we're distracted by having to finish it quickly, etc., etc. So that all makes reasonable sense. But, it is very difficult. It is very difficult to sort of justify the no-self theory as a metaphysical theory. Because, why might that be? Why is it difficult to justify the no-self theory?
There's so many justifications for the self, so kind of hard to argue with all those.
What about the Buddhist response that all these justifications are conventional?
Well,
Just a matter of practice.
Causal relations going over lifetimes, they just kind of, I feel like they're just kind of trying to get around saying that their self does continue over lifetimes, but they call it this causal relations.
Yeah, they call the soul the causal relations. Yeah, that might be one thing to say. So their metaphysical picture is suspect. And I think that was the point I was trying to make, that their metaphysical picture is suspect. I think, again, this is a sense I have, and there are, Buddhist scholars and monks, so I have noted there is Bhikkhu Thanissaro, who is a Buddhist monk who's a practicing Buddhist, and there's also another academic, Miri al-Bahari. I don't want to talk just about what I think, but other people in the profession also think that the best way to understand the Buddhist theory is to think of it as a practical strategy, not to think of it as a metaphysical theory. The Buddhist was forced to make it a metaphysical theory in, trying to justify it to the Hindus, and also to, for political reasons, for if you like, reasons other than doing metaphysics, reasons other than doing science, reasons, concerns other than wanting to find out what the world really is like. And the main concern that the Buddhists have is how to reduce suffering. So the Buddhist monk and scholar, so I thought we should end on that note. Talking about the Buddhists, the Buddhist monk and scholar, who's very, very well respected, and again, you can find lots and lots of stuff by him on the internet, and it's all free to access, says that, if we think of no self as a metaphysical thesis, if we sort of keep thinking, even if we say that the no self is what the upshot of the no self theory is, that the distinction between self and the other is gone, like we talked about in the first part of the lecture. Even if we say there is no self-other distinction, this does not reduce suffering, because, here's the reason why I say, if you identify with everything else in the universe, if you think this is a part of me, and this is a point that came up in the last lecture, if I identify with everything, then I'm going to be pained, as the monk says, by every felled tree. Every tree that is cut down is going to cause a lot of suffering. If I don't identify with anything, as long as we think of, I am the same, the notion of, and if, you think of the other sort of sense of it, that I am the same as everything else, there is also this sense of, what's the point of trying to reduce the suffering? This kind of not not identifying with anything is also, sort of limiting in some way. Not identifying with everything, if we take one way of reading the no-self view, that is, I am continuous with everything else in the universe, then I'm going to be suffering, because there's still an I. I'm going to be suffering when anything in the universe suffers. If, on the other hand, I identify with nothing, so there's no I, then the reason to continue, the practical reason to reduce, other people's suffering, to be compassionate, that goes as well. So either way, he doesn't think, that thinking about the self-other distinction, or thinking about the no-self view, taking the no-self view seriously, in terms of giving up the no-self, the self-other distinction, is a good way to go. The Buddhist monk suggests that the best way to think about it is to think about it as, we give up these notions completely and reconceive the world in terms of the Four Noble Truths. What's ultimately true is the Four Noble Truths. What are the Four Noble Truths? There is suffering. Suffering has a cause. The cause of suffering is, suffering can be removed by removing its causes, and the Eightfold Path gives you the path how to remove the suffering. That's all there is. There's no further metaphysical thesis, there's no further metaphysical truth that the Buddhists can come up with. The best way is just to think, that's what the truth is, and that's what we need to do. And whatever practical strategy works for you. So, if you think in terms of I and mine and all that, but, you are able to live a life according to the Eightfold Path, that's great. No need to get. So it's kind of what the monk suggests is that we need to reject getting into, back to the same old point, we need to reject getting into this mess about what is the world really like. We have a practical question at issue, how do we reduce suffering, and we deal with it in a practical way, and we rethink the world in the way that best meets our needs. Our need is to reduce suffering, and that's what we do. We don't get bogged down in metaphysical debates about what there really is in the world. That's, something, if you like, left to science. Let science do the thinking there. What we need to do, what Buddhism is trying to say, teach, according to Thanissaro, bhikkhu is, bhikkhu, by the way, is like, saint or bhante. So Thanissaro, what he really thinks is that, that's what we need to learn from Buddhism. That it's a practical strategy to reduce suffering. And the Four Noble Truths, that's all there is to it. There is nothing more, no need of these elaborate metaphysics, no self-other distinction. And, you find elaborate epistemology as well in Buddhists that we did not cover here. He just thinks all this philosophizing, all this thing that we've been doing for the last 11 weeks in this class is not going to help as for, with the practical aim of what Buddhism is about. What Buddhism is about is how to reduce suffering in the world. I'll finish the lecture. I'm sorry, it's 11:21 now. And next week we'll talk about the Charvaks, a little look into Indian materialists, and that'll be all. Thank you again for coming, and I'll see you next week.